Good afternoon. We are continuing the Section 59 investigation. This afternoon we will be hearing from Healthman. Will you please introduce yourselves, gentlemen?
Okay, good afternoon to all. If I can introduce ourselves, it's on the slide there. My name is Casper Venter. I'm the Managing Director of the business and been involved for many years. Marty Roos, he heads up our investigations, but she's not available today, so I'll be taking it. Then on my left-hand side, we've got Mr. Piet Kotze. Piet does most of our data analytic work. He's an accountant by trade. Then on the left, we've got Mr. Julian Botha, who's our internal legal advisor. So should anything come up on the legal aspects, which we're actually not dealing with in our presentation, but was in our written submission, he will answer that. And on our right, we've got Mrs. Brenda Gous, who is our coding expert, having spent 30 years in coding at MediHelp. So we are going to deal a bit with coding. So if there's any specific issues that you might have, she may be able to respond better.
Thank you. So who will be talking?
I'll do the original presentation, the full presentation, and theirs might be limited to one question that I don't have to answer.
All right, so maybe let's take your oath then. So you are Mr. Venter.
That's correct.
Will you? Are you happy to take the oath?
Yes.
All right, so will you just say after me, I and your full name?
I, Casper Venter,
Hereby swear
hereby swear
that the evidence I'm about to give
that the evidence I'm about to give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing else but the truth.
and nothing else but the
Raise
truth.
your right hand and say, so help me
So
God.
help me God.
Thank you. So you can continue then.
Okay, so if I just look at the agenda, the items we like to cover today is a bit of a background to Healthman, SAPAF that we spoke about yesterday, and the societies and how they all fit into each other, because this is very much a combined effort between everybody. I'd like to deal a bit with the Healthman experience in doing a forensic support. Why do the investigations take place? What is the investigation review process, problems experience, data analysis, which was alluded to yesterday as well. Then a very important part for us is coding. That we'd like to deal with that, and we have pushed it to the end. And then our view on a way forward, how we can make things work. If I look at SAPAF is has multiple members across many societies, and that's a brief summary of them. If we look at the governance structures of SAPAF itself, it has a board of directors with Dr. Archer as the CEO, a surgical division, a consulting division, and each one of them nominates 4 or 5 directors to the board. And then on the support side, we have various other disciplines that participate. So all in all, we have about 7,000 members in SAPAF. SAPAF on its own basically deals with regulatory issues and do not get involved in any day-to-day issues. So it's all regulatory issues that's dealt with. And if one looks at the disciplines, you will see that both on the surgical and consulting side, it's a very complete list of disciplines, and those would be the disciplines that have access to us if they should have any forensic issues. Those members are entitled to come to Healthman for assistance. And what I thought is to show you how a specific discipline, and this is generic across most of the disciplines work. You have a society at the top, you have a public sector component, a private sector component, and then various subspecialties. And as Dr. Cox said yesterday, it's in the area of the subspecialties where there's often confusion, or especially in the profiling area, because those people aren't identified. This is specifically gynecology, the society at the top that has about 700 members, and then their management group. So the differentiation between management groups and the societies is the society looks after ethics and CPD and training, and the management group looks after the commercial aspects, dealing with the medical schemes, looking after coding, member queries, and so on. They would subcontract that work to Healthman, and Healthman on its side then consults to SAPAF on whatever matters comes up, and then each of these groups have a variety of consultants that they use in various aspects, and I'm not going to go through each of those. So the gynae focus, for instance, for the past 2 years is on better obstetrics. The new focus will be on better gynecology, so a lot of quality stuff coming out of that. Just from the Healthman side, just so that we understand, we've been around since 1996. We're a private healthcare consultancy company. Important, we have no external shareholders, and we do not consult to medical schemes, administrators, or hospitals, so our total consulting base is private practitioners. You know, we only work on the one side, being the practitioner side. The directors, myself, Ernst Ackerman, who's in our Cape Town office, an attorney, Mardi that I've alluded to, and then Piet that's sitting next to me, 55 support staff, and then officers, Joburg and Cape Town. And similar to the SAPAF sort of footprint is the Healthman footprint of the various societies that we represent. And I think important at this stage, we represent a group, a discipline, a society. We do not have individual members. So if you look at our profile, we would have 26 clients, and we report to their board of directors, and their board of directors gives us, in terms of a service level agreement, certain tasks to perform, and forensics being one of them. So if I purely look, I'm not going to go through any of the other services, but on the forensic side and the legal support, okay, we support our clients in the forensic reviews against them by medical schemes, administrators, and then the HPCSA. I must add that the HPCSA ones is very far and few, probably every 5 years or so, not many of those that comes up. And then we participate in various fraud management units, being the BHF. So one of our staff members sits on the fraud management unit of BHF. I previously did as well. And then the people that we interact with really are the four major administrators, Discovery, Metropolitan, and MedScheme. And then GEMS is always seen as a business unit by themselves. We do get the occasional inquiry coming, or not inquiry coming to us, but that we have to deal with, and that would be Quebeca. And then occasionally a firm of attorneys somewhere that's been tasked to look at a specific matter. So just to talk a bit about our experience in forensic reviews. You know, so first of all, I'd like to give you a historic a perspective of what has happened over the years. Now, one's got to look at it that I'm talking about a process of 8 years, and things have evolved. So if I look at the initial experience with forensic reviews, it was very confrontational, and there was no trust between the various parties, always confrontation, a lot of aggro. In those, our view is definitely that, and if I talk about doctors, it's generic practitioners, because we work with other disciplines as well, physiotherapy, OTs, and so on. The practitioners really felt threatened, and many just signed acknowledgement of debts. And I think it was their lives got to carry on. You've got to take the position of a doctor. If he's got a forensic review, he feels very embarrassed about it, you know, because it's called a forensic review. So they just signed a lot of it prior to our involvement. Doctors are embarrassed. So the early day investigators were, in my view, not very experienced. They don't come out of a field that they understand the healthcare, and invariably they might not have had forensic experience. You know, it's a skilled area to work in. Our view, a lot of bullying tactics initially, e.g. the meetings were recorded, sound and visual recordings were done of the investigations, and initially doctors weren't always informed, you know, that it's recorded or it's being visually recorded as well. But the process has matured now. I think things are going a lot better, and I think from our side as an organization, we have good relationships with all of the units. The Metropolitan one is very new, so not a lot has come from that, but long-standing with Discovery and MedScheme, and even with GEMS, you know, carrying out these reviews. So if one looks at an overview of all the investigations that we've done in the past probably 5-6 years, you know, one's got to look at it. So if one looks at the provincial mix of it, one would expect Gauteng to be at the top. So Gauteng 139, and I've given you the sort of mix, the race profile across those, across Gauteng. The second highest number is KZN. So you will see in KZN, and that's because of the doctor population there. We've had 54 investigations, Indian practitioners, the Free State 32, the Western Cape 32. I think size-wise the Free State is a bit high in relation to the population that it has there. Northwest 14, Mpumalanga 10, unknown where we just don't know where the people are, 3 or 5, Limpopo, Northern Cape, and then Sundries. So in total over this period we've been involved in 320 investigations against practitioners of all disciplines, and I will refer you to the various disciplines that we've looked at. And then you will see the totals obviously at the bottom of it. So 95 black practitioners, 97 Indian practitioners, 122 white practitioners, coloured only 4. The coloured ones is of course also difficult because we have to base it on the surname. It's not always easy to understand and allocate it. And the unknown is where we really just don't know. You know, we haven't met the people, they're not on our database, and you know, but nonetheless we have recorded it. Now, dissimilar to the
May I interrupt, Mr. Fenton, just to ask
Sure.
a question? What is the total population of your clientele, I suppose? What I'm trying to ask is who comes to you to assist with investigations, and what are the demographics of that group, just so that we can make sense of this table?
Yeah, at this stage, with the time that we had available and sort of only realizing yesterday what's of interest, you know, we haven't done that per discipline, of course, and you'll see the disciplines. So for the psychs that's presenting on the 29th, we've done it, and you'll get that. I'm going to show you that. And with the physicians, that was yesterday, it was done because I presented by themselves. We will provide it to the Commission if that's what you want, but we will have to get each society's just their consent,
Please,
which they will give.
Thank you.
Thanks. And can you tell us over what period these investigations were done?
This would be probably about a 6-year period. So about 50 a year. At this stage, it seems to be escalating a bit, as though we're getting one every second day at least. So that's a 6-year period.
I'll just ask a couple of things about these figures. What is the baseline number that you're working from? I mean, the total is 320 of what?
No, 320, and in some of the detail you'll see, so it's 320 investigations.
Yes, but of what is the potential pool that could be investigated?
Ooh, that would be probably 3,000. We'll have to get that demographics for you. We haven't extracted that. So it's at least 3,000 specialists.
Specialists, yes.
Yeah.
Now, out of that 3,000 specialists, what is the racial breakdown?
Now, once again, that we will have to pull. We haven't done that. And as you would have heard yesterday with Dr. Koch, we don't actually record it. So when we did the physician one for yesterday, we actually sorted the surnames, you know, because it's not on the application form. So no society has it as a requirement, and we don't have it. But you can guess from the surnames, more or less. It's a 90% accuracy, so that can be done.
Thank you.
Okay, if we look at the investigations, the 320 per the various administrators stroke medical schemes, you will see that the most has come from Discovery Health. They've been at it the longest as well, and you'll see the racial mix on that, you know, being 36 black, 58 Indian, and 81 white. That makes up the 179, the med scheme one. And then also remember that these are members that come to us voluntary. You know, they don't have to come to us. But if they come to us voluntary, we will assist them as part of our mandate with the society, and it does not cost them any money. You know, so it is a worthwhile service, but it's a voluntary one. And you know, when the process starts, and I'll talk a bit about the processes, they've got to give us a mandate, and in the mandate we'll specifically tell them what we're going to do. Okay, so Med Scheme 72, GEMS on its own 46, Metropolitan a lot less, 10. They've got a new unit that constantly changes, but one can probably add the 46 GEMS to them because the GEMS forensic unit works in Metropolitan. then MediHelp, very few, and the other schemes, not a lot, you know. And it's I guess, a reality that the smaller schemes that self-administered or smaller administrators just don't have the skills or the capacity to deal with these investigations. So that's the mix per administrator scheme. Okay, if we look at our distribution per discipline, so we have the psychiatrist right at the top, 119, and I'm going to show you some of the details a bit later. You will also hear about them in a lot more detail on the 29th, when Dr. Talatola is going to lead some evidence on that. The GMG is gynecology 46. The reason it's high is it's probably the largest surgical group. They've got pretty much over 600 members. You know, so that is the CPF as clinical psychologists. You can lump them with psychiatrists to a certain extent because it's a time-based discipline. General surgeons 24, the physicians yesterday the 22, ENT surgeons 19, GPs 13. We don't have a big client base in the general practitioners. It's sort of 280 clients, and it's been quite limited. The ones that we've had to attend to, then pediatricians, ophthalmology, very few. Ophthalmologists, neurologists, 8, but there's probably only 80 in the country. SAAA is audiology. We've had a few of those, but not a lot. It's limited. Radiographers, ATSA is dietitians, the Neurosurgeon Society, a small number urology, dermatology, 1 ocularist, 1 occupational therapist, which was from Bloem. The plastic surgeon is unknown because we've only dealt with this survey in the request in the last week. It's a new client of ours from the 1st of July, and we don't have their database yet. And then only 1 optometrist who was from Nelspruit. So that's sort of the mix. And you will find that the tendency is that time-based disciplines are the subject of most of the investigations, because the other ones is a bit more complicated, because coding is a lot more complicated than the other disciplines, but the time discipline is quite straightforward. You're selling minutes. You know, it's an easy one to actually pursue. FCPSA I've purely kept in here to keep our documents complete, but we've dealt with it, so we don't have to go back to it today. Psychiatry, this is where we spend most of our time. So you will see our investigations. I've started with the demographics of our psychiatry group. So it's 284 psychiatrists, and it's split 64 black, 147 white. And this is in the management group and not the society. So the society would have 500 members, but only people of the management group has access to us and our services. So that's the membership split. And I guess important in all of these cases, the management groups and the societies are all voluntary. And it's a voluntary. So, and we can never get stats how many people aren't members of the societies, because it's not available at BHF with the PCNS, and it's not available at the HPCSA either. So that's our membership on that one, and it's sort of a membership like that we can give you on other disciplines if you require specific, perhaps the big one, the gynecologist, but not the small ones where it's only been 3 or 4. It's not really going to add a lot of value. Okay, so if we look at the split in the psychiatry investigations, most were in Gauteng, 26 in KZN, and then the rest. The split as well, you can see there's 45 black practitioners, 40 Indian practitioners, and 34 white practitioners. If one looks at this slide, similar to the FCPSA one yesterday, so it has the number of investigations and then the number of members investigated. So if you look at, let's say, the black practitioners, 23 practitioners with 45 investigations, and you will see it's all over. So in the psychiatry field, except in the colored one, there are multiple investigations against the practitioners. You know, and in some of them it's not multiple investigations, but quite a few repeat investigations. You know, a practitioner was investigated 5 years back, and now it comes back for another investigation for pretty much the same thing. You know, same type of errors, coding errors, time-based and so on. So the psychiatry is probably 90% time-based is the issue, you know, that we have to deal with.
Just to take you back, sorry, to that slide, if you're still on it.
Mm-hmm.
So there does seem something odd about this, because it does look like, if you look at the bottom row, that black and Indian psychiatrists are disproportionately investigated.
Well, this is, you know, this is how it comes in.
Yeah.
You know, just remember on this, everybody. So if you do a time-based investigation, you look at all 400 psychiatrists, you know, it's quite easy because you purely add up the code, you add up the minutes. So everybody will be reviewed in one go. And you know what tends to happen, the way a lot of the investigation goes in cycles. So you would do it 3 years back and you would do it another 3 years later. But in there is a lot easier to review everybody, and then you extract the ones where the time is excessive, and this is the result of that. You know, so it's purely, it's a numbers game.
Yes, I mean, I just want to follow this because you see the member demographics has to be compared with the investigation demographics. Now, on the white side, the member demographics is 147, and the investigation demographics is 34. Now, if you look at the Indian demographics on the member side, it's 66 and 40 investigation.
That's like, huh?
That is an astonishingly high number. And the same thing with the black means African, I presume. That's 64 people. And if you compare that with the demographic of investigation, it's 45.
So that's 45 investigations, yes.
Yeah, but versus a population of only 64.
Yeah, but
I mean,
you have to look at
higher
the
than,
practitioners is 23.
yes.
But the investigations, as I said, it's multiple.
Yes, there could be multiple investigations. But
Yeah.
I mean, the baseline figure there is 64 in total and 45 in total on the
Yeah.
investigation side.
Yeah. So as an example, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, that means there would have been 45 investigations as against a population of 64.
45, yeah.
Yeah,
So
45 against
64 members went through 45 investigations,
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah, and the same with
But-
the Indians. It's 40 members went, 66, out of 66, 40 went through investigations. There could have been multiple investigations per person.
Yes,
And
that's
then
correct.
look at the last number. It's 147, and only 34 have been taken to investigations on the white
Yeah.
side.
Yeah, you must remember that's the result of the data analytics. You know,
No,
so if the data analytics comes up positive, then that's so. You know, it's a numbers game. You don't know it in advance. But just to get back to that 45 investigation, is one practitioner has been investigated 5 times. You know, and the bulk of these actually come out of GEMS. You know, and that's the GEMS profile, unfortunately. You
But
know,
then-
so
but
we pick it up as a number,
Sure.
numbers game.
Sure, we're just trying to make sense of the numbers and what
Yeah.
the numbers are showing. Then if we didn't use that figure because there are multiple investigations, and if we just looked at the next row, which is the number of members that are investigated,
Yes,
it tells a similar story.
yes,
23 out of 64
were
black,
investigated.
25 of 147 white.
yeah. Those are the facts.
So you say it's just a product of the data. Please just explain to us how you put this together then, because I'm trying to understand the bottom row says percentage of individual members investigated per race, right? So I understand that's the total, that's the results effectively of all the preceding slides. So you
Yes.
can see 35.9% of black practitioners have been investigated, 37.9% of Indian, and 17% white. Okay? But that's investigated. Are you saying this isn't investigation, this is just what the flagging system produces?
No, this is investigations.
investigation.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
formal investigations.
Good. So why are you saying it's just a product of the data?
No, because
Analytics,
on
it's a numbers game.
what initiates the process is a set of data. So you would run it, and I don't know how the discovery analysis works, all the med scheme data and so on, but one assumes, it's data analytics. You push in all the practices, and it would be 100% review of practices. There's formulas that adds up the codes and the time, and it produces a result for investigation. And they would obviously also look at if someone is 10% out of the norm, no. If someone is 50% out of the norm, yes. So in this case, just remember, so psychiatry, I would guess 90% of their work goes through 3 codes. So it's a consultation, and then a short psychotherapy, a longer psychotherapy, and an hour psychotherapy. So if you have 20 patients per day, having a 2975 long psychotherapy doesn't add up, because you can't. Those are the numbers. So this is an easier one than a surgical discipline, because it's minutes that shows your variance.
Thank you.
There is something that is, would you agree that there is, the outcome is racially biased?
No, it's not biased, because you work on the input. On the outcome,
The outcome shows that there are more investigations within black than white.
there's more investigations, but it might be that the profiles indicated these practitioners for investigation, and it indicated less in the white provider side to be investigated. And just remember, it's a number.
It is a number, but
Yeah.
the number is massive.
Yeah, but the result of that is. But that's what your analytics indicates. Can't get away from that.
Yes, I think you should continue. We are now on the slide with the percentages, correct? No, sorry, on the Colombo slide.
So we're now going to look a bit at the why the forensic reviews take place, and should you're old enough to know this investigator, I should have put him on to forensics. Okay, the one that we debated quite long yesterday is if you deviate from the norm or average of your peers. Now, as was said yesterday, it's undefined. You are told that you're outside the norm, but you never know what the norm is or the average is. And that is a criticism of the process, and even we don't get access to that data either. So you have to look at a practitioner on its own. So what we're now trying to do as a follow-up or counter to that is to get our own data and say, well, is that in fact true? So we did a test run for the psychiatry with claims data, where someone was indicated to be outside the average, the norm, or the peers, and the data that we received independently indicated it's not so. So that's a process that's a bit, that initiates it, that's a bit difficult. And Dr. Koch did say, especially when you get into the subspecialties, well, what's the norm? In the gynecology, there's about 8 subspecialties. In the pediatrics there is. So there's a lot of subspecialties. In the psychiatry, not really. Services, and I do say allegedly not rendered, but claimed for, because one doesn't know that up to the stage that one actually do it. And what would happen is the forensic investigator would send a list to the doctor or practitioner and say the following patients say they did not see you. So that leads to an investigation. The level of acuity, so quite a bit of debate about the level of care that you receive, and whether it's in the high care ward or whether it's in ICU. So what happens is the hospital bills it at one level of care, and the doctor bills it at another level of care. And there's a dispute. Okay, there's a dispute, so we're going to investigate. Can I perhaps just backtrack, and Piet can correct me? In the psychiatry, I think 55% of our investigations, 55% in the number, came to a zero. You know, there's nothing. So it was closed off the files, no recoupment. You know, so there is a high percentage that actually, so even though the numbers are high, you know, a lot of them ends up with, doctor, you're okay. You know, so, and that's by consensus with the investigators. So it's a bit of an unnecessary then, but nonetheless, just wanted to, I forgot that one.
That does suggest there's something wrong with this, the data that's
No.
pushing up these numbers.
No, the data is that the investigations were carried out. There's either acknowledgement debt or the file is closed.
Could you repeat that?
So the investigation started. So it's an investigation. We've done our reviews, the scheme has done their reviews. We either agree or disagree. There's acknowledgement of debt signed, or the scheme agrees that it's not a valid investigation and the file can be closed. So it's a not guilty, if that's easier.
I think we accept that.
Okay,
So it's 55% comes back with zero.
yeah,
out
in
of the-
that of the 122 cases in psychiatry, so it's a
So I just want to understand that 50, if we are looking at your
That's correct, yeah.
figures, just to make
Yeah.
sure we understand. So it's out of those flagged for investigation.
Yeah.
That would be the two other slides.
Yeah, and that is in the report that will be presented on the 29th. So a high percentage of those investigations were settled without any sanctions or repayments.
But it's out
With
of,
an acknowledgement of debt, sorry.
yeah.
No,
No.
without.
Without.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but
So
it's out of,
45% ended up in an acknowledgement of debt
yeah, but
or
it's-
something else
It's out of what, that 55%, just to make sure I
of the
understand.
investigations.
But Of
120.
your slides, which one?
Of 122
122.
or 120.
Or the 120, so that's
Yeah.
the slide at page 7.
Well, let's quickly have a look at the page. Yeah, that's the total number of investigations is 120.
Yeah. So 55 of that would be
55% of them
zero.
were solved.
And then the rest would be a sanction of some sort.
Yeah.
Could you also provide us with the racial demographics of those that are found not guilty? Those approximate 60-something. I think that would be helpful.
I'm not sure if we have all of that because occasionally we leave it up to the scheme and the provider, but we can have a look prior to the 29th. Okay.
Just to make sure I understand this, so we've got the 55% that's been forgiven. We've got the 45% that has a sanction of some sort.
No, that's 55 is not forgiven.
But
Its
the-
assumptions were wrong.
Yes, but the investigation was wrong.
Closed.
It has found nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, and then the 45.
And it can be, sorry if I interrupt,
Yeah,
it
it's
can
fine.
be, and you don't want to hear it, a numbers game again. And we had, as an example, 2 weeks back where the investigation started off, doctor, there's a day that you actually spent 49 hours with patients. So when we looked at the data, no, it was compiled incorrect and it ended up at 8 hours. You know, so it's going to be closed. Yeah. Okay. If I can perhaps give you that answer, it's... Okay, now I've got to put on specs again. Okay, in 35 cases, anomalies were found and the doctor had to refund. So that's 34 to 28%. And then in 66 audit cases, so 55% of the cases, no anomalies were found. And the medical schemes accepted the feedback and explanation. That gives you the 55. And then 13 cases, the doctor referred the audits to lawyers, and we didn't carry on further. And I must add, that's the wrong thing to do, is to take it to attorneys. That's with respect to the legal profession, because they come at it from a non-healthcare.
Yeah, well, as long as you're talking about attorneys, that's
Yeah.
fine.
No, I wouldn't go to the advocates. No.
Can you just
Okay.
tell me-
And then 7% were still in progress, 7 or 5.8%. So, you know, the data is available, but we haven't put the racial part to that.
All right, just tell me something else on these numbers. So everyone gets investigated, and what we know, what the schemes do is either they will put you on direct payment at the commencement of the investigation, or in the middle of investigation, or at the conclusion of the investigation. One never knows. So out of this 55% that has been found not guilty, in other words, there was no basis for the investigation to begin with, do you know how many were suspended during the investigation?
Okay, we will have to look at that. We don't have that statistic. And it depends. So if I take the discovery health environment, whilst the investigation is ongoing, they don't suspend you. So it carries on until we have it. Unfortunately, in the Met scheme, initially when investigation started, payment was suspended until it's concluded. But in the discovery one, they don't suspend, except if you now take 9 months to come back with an answer. Of course, then that will happen, or if it's an obvious fraudulent transaction. But the ones that we deal with, it's not suspended.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're back to our friend. Okay, so if you deviate. So the level of acuity does lead to problems. And you know what happens there is that the schemes would also say that doctors put patients unnecessary into ICU. Your ICD-10 doesn't indicate it, but it's a reality because they are concerned that often the level of nursing isn't adequate and it's risky, especially with the neonate babies. They end up 100% in ICU. But that's sort of a problem that we generally can solve. Then I've put the next one in red because I guess this is 80 or 90% of our work is alleged coding irregularities. And we have heard Dr. Anband Pillay make comments about coding, and I'm sure other people have made coding, but we'll tell you the other side of coding, and why it happens. So the reasons for it, and we're having a session on coding, it's combination of codes is incorrect, so you will use 2 or 3 codes in a combination and it's not appropriate. You're not allowed to use it correct. Upcoding or unbundling, so the unbundling would be, let's say, a knee replacement and you try and add 8 or 9 codes to it. So that's unbundling. The upcoding is to go to a higher level of code. So if you see the patient for 40 minutes, you charge the 60-minute code. That would be the upcoding. Just take it to a higher level. So the upcoding and the unbundling, 2 different issues. In the surgical environment, unbundling is very complex and very few people understand it. Hence, we bring the coding experts onto it. And then the incorrect application of certain codes. And there's a big dispute between the medical side and the funders, for example, about what's an emergency. So if you run a casualty unit and a person stops at the casualty unit, is it an emergency or not? As far as the doctors are concerned, you come to casualty because you've got an emergency. So what the investigators would say, well, if I look at the ICD-10, it didn't end up an emergency, but it's the perception. I go to a casualty because I really feel fraught, sick. And and what do you do if you've got a child? You take the person to the casualty. So there's a lot of debate about that, and that is specifically was our GP one, which was a casualty unit of 20-odd doctors. And it only runs as a casualty unit. But, so interpretation is often an issue. Patient complaints. Patients do complain that services were not rendered or they were overcharged. Now, forensics doesn't really work with overcharging, except when it gets to certain consumables and devices, hearing aids and so on. But service is not rendered, the doctor did not see me. And that obviously has to be followed up. It's not always the case, because the patient might have been in ICU. It might have been that it's a doctor that's on duty for the weekend and the doctor sees all the patients, especially in psychiatry, we would back up, and you won't always know. But that does happen and one deals with it. Total time spent per day, very relevant to time-based disciplines. It can be GPs, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists. That's purely time-based type of disciplines. I'm sure one might find it to a certain extent in physiotherapy as well, but we don't deal much with physiotherapy. Fraudulent behavior, including collusion with patients. We see that a lot in the press. You get a service, but you actually didn't get a service and you split the money. Those, fortunately, don't end up with us. A doctor that's involved in those wouldn't come to us. And then the consistent use of longer time-based codes and group codes where you see multiple patients. So in the psychiatry area, you will see a group therapy patients, and it can be 12 patients in a go. So often what the schemes do then is they add all 12 patients' codes to time together, and you end up with 49 hours. So it is a bit of a contentious one. Doubts about the scope of practice. So investigators would tell the doctor, and we heard Dr. Koch yesterday, we're going to investigate you because you're not allowed to do an echo, or for a gynae, and why are you doing ultrasounds? Well, all gynaes do ultrasounds, but we've had investigations on gynecologists doing ultrasounds, saying it's outside the scope of practice, and that invariably leads to, and I'll talk about fishing expeditions a bit later. Please send us your qualification. Please send us a letter from your professor that you're adequately trained to do that. Well, if you're registered, you're probably adequately trained, especially if you've been in practice for 20 or 30 years. So scope of practice, not often, but it does happen. So what triggers these? And the first one is the administrator data analytical reviews. That's what triggers it. But they do also have other type of reviews. So you will do clinical audits as well. So it's not only a data analytical. They will do clinical audits as well. Hotlines, whistleblowers, typical. Each of the large administrators do have that. Then rules-based detection software and internal control. So that's where you would look at clinical aspects. Internal forensic, often innocent errors can trigger. So you've made an error, and that then leads to full investigation of your practice. And Mr. Kotz and I have seen that when we look at the capturing of data, you capture a 6 instead of a 9. It leads up in a total different code outside your scope of practice, and they look at your whole practice. So those finger errors happen in coding quite frequently as well. Then routine audits, so they would do a routine audit. So one typically finds that the investigators would decide, let's go and have a look for the next 6 months at ophthalmology. Let's see, what do we see? What trends do we see in ophthalmology or not, or psychiatry? Or they would pick on a specific code. So our problematic codes would be 0146 and 0147, which has debatable definitions to it. So they will draw everything with 0146 or 0147 code and look at it, all the application of rules. That's also rules, and we'll speak a bit about the rules in the coding session. Then we're back to the deviation from the normal profiles compared to peers. So I'll give you an easy one. In psychiatry, we had one that probably took us 6 months to solve in the end, where a specific psychiatrist only had 1 hour consultations. That's it. So, well, if we look at your peers, they've got 20 minute, 40 minute, 60 minute, but this is the way the practice works. This specific practitioner doesn't hospitalize patients, but does psychotherapy in rooms. But now you're different from your peers. And it was really a battle to solve it, but we did. And there was no repayment on that. Then combination of codes is wrong combination of codes, and you'll see coding is quite complex. And then the higher normal utilization of specific codes. These are all sort of analytical one. They would pick a code and see how many times have you used it, how many times has another practitioner used it. So we've got a specific one now, for instance, where I think it's a general surgeon that purely specializes in pain management. So his codes doesn't look like the rest. That's his only thing that he does, is pain management. But of course, you don't know that when you look at the numbers. You actually have to get the practitioner on board, but then he's already received, or she, a letter of investigation. So I think what one should do is, and it's not in our recommendations, is that you should differentiate coding reviews from forensic investigations. Coding reviews are less threatening, and coding reviews will always happen. So I would personally split it, and then involve, of course, people with extensive coding knowledge. So if I look at what is the Healthman forensic review process.
Can you just tell
Sure.
me on the slide about what triggers an investigation? The discovery report says that 53% of their forensic investigation start off as an anonymous whistleblower.
can't confirm that or not. It sounds high for me.
Because you say that actually the highest is the internal
Coding.
analytical reviews
Yeah.
by the schemes themselves.
That I would assume, but I'm not, I can't tell you what Discovery or MedScheme does.
Yeah.
It's the whistleblower doesn't sound right for me. Doesn't. And, if you think about it, whistleblowers would be very much, I would guess, where it's a fraudulent type of thing that's happening, but doesn't sound right. Okay, so from our side, we would receive a complaint from a member. We would request a mandate so we don't do the work if the doctor hasn't agreed that we do the work, and in order to do the work, we need full cooperation from the practitioner. Otherwise, it drags on for months. We've had investigations, so we've really tightened up on this because we don't want to spend 9 months on an investigation. So it's quite difficult. We explain the process to the client, what we're going to do. We inform the investigating party, so we would ask the practitioner to inform the scheme or administrator that they've appointed Healthman and the society to do the investigation. We would then communicate with the investigating officer and or the department doing it. We try and determine as much as possible information and stuff up front. If it's coding related, and as I said, most of ours is coding, we would request an expert coding opinion. Now that coding opinion can be ours internally. We would always go back to the society as well and ask them their view on the appropriate use of the coding. And then there are a few people out in the market that we use as expert opinions. So, we do get good views on that. And we talk to the specific administrator schemes, coding experts as well. But I must add, I don't think you have more than 10 experts in this country that really understands coding. It's I think even some of the larger administrators have either 1 or 2 or nothing. So it's a difficult one. So we will compare that expert opinion with the findings that we've had. We will validate investigating party calculations. So that's when we get to the data analytics, and we'll deal with that in a separate side. So we will do all the working separately and then compare our findings with the schemes. And that's where we pick up anomalies. We will communicate the outcome to our client. We will meet with the client and then discuss the findings. Now, when we meet with the clients...
Mr. Venter, sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask you a question about the coding and the expertise in relation to coding? Much of the evidence we've heard so far suggests that there's not any certainty around coding. And if there's an expert, you would think an expert would be able to give a certain view. But it is beginning to sound like to me that a lot of this is negotiated, and there are many pragmatic outcomes in relation to the coding. Would that be fair comment?
No, I don't think it's fair comment that there's no certainty. It creates a lot of issues, but there are rules applicable to coding. Coding's been around for a long time. It's published, it's discussed, there are training workshops and so on. The dilemma that you have is that there's no formal training for a doctor in the academic part. Then you do your housemanship or you become a registrar to specialize, and right up to the day that you open private practice, you've received no training. And then you ask your colleagues, and your colleagues have been doing it wrong for 10 years.
Perhaps as a starting point, if a doctor, young doctor, or anyone in fact looking for the correct code, starts his or her search, what code do they turn to?
What code?
What is the document's name, which gives the certainty?
So this is the starting point. So this is the current 2019 Medical Doctors Coding Manual, compiled by SAMA and reviewed by specialist societies. It's been around since I've been in the industry, and it's updated probably every second year. So it's around, and you can see it's quite a big one. If you go to the groups that we work with, and I did send those documents to you on Friday, we produce specific booklets, for each of the disciplines. So a young doctor gets hold of this book and has a look at it. And if all else fails, phones.
And do the schemes accept across the board that that SAMA coding manual is the correct manual to have reference to?
Well, when we get to the coding section, you'll see no. There's a lot of resistance from the scheme, and schemes now will deal with that a bit later. A lot of conflict in that area. But, you know, if one thinks about it, coding is about clinical practice, and coding is in the domain of the profession. It's not in the domain of a medical scheme. And even in the SAMA one, they get it from each of the specialist societies. And the process is always, if you want to change a code, update the code, we actually refer to CPT being the American system. So we can't change a code in South Africa if that equivalent code doesn't exist in the CPT system, which is the most comprehensive coding system probably in the world.
So is your submission we should accept that the SAMA manual is the correct one, and that is what brings certainty to coding in this environment?
Yes, it is the correct one. It's the one that's in use. It's approved. There's a process to approve it. Does it have certain, and I'll speak about that a bit later as well. There are codes that should be changed. There are codes that should be reviewed, but it's the most current version. You know, and I'll repeat it later, but I'll say it now as well. Many schemes default to 2006 RPL, which is totally inappropriate, and it can't be used. But many forensic reviews actually default to 2006 and say, well, 2006, this is what it said. You know, and that's 13 years later. You know, so we are slowly convincing the scheme. So Discovery, to a large extent, will follow this. We're progressing very well with MedScheme. But if I look at historic events that's happened, it wasn't accepted. But this is the Bible.
That's what I wanted to just explore in relation to what you were saying to my colleague, to say that as far as you are concerned, there is a Bible. It's called the SAMA Code of 20.
Well, sorry, can you just repeat that?
I mean, as far as you are concerned, there is a coding Bible.
Yeah.
It's produced by SAMA. It's updated every 2 years.
2-3 years, but it can occasionally be one. So it did have a break, and I'll get to that when the Competition Commission interfered in 2004. That led to a bit of a break in the updates, but it has been updated regularly. And then the health market inquiry sort of also led to a bit of a gap in updating, but it is updated. But it's only updated if a specific specialist society requests it. So if you have a society that doesn't, it might be 10 years out of date. But on balance, it's the reference point to start on.
Now, we have a problem because on the evidence we've had, the schemes do not accept that.
Well, it doesn't mean they're correct. If the schemes don't accept it, and I'll go as far as to say the schemes say they don't accept it when it suits them. I'll make that bland statement. I've been through many of these investigations. When something doesn't suit them, you don't accept it. But on balance, we don't have problems at this stage of the acceptance of the coding and of the specialist discipline.
Yes. Now, the
But to say that they don't accept it, I think is not correct.
Yes.
It's not the truth.
Yes. Now, what those schemes who say they don't accept the SAMA code, so you say they revert back to the 2006 reference pricing,
Yeah.
but which is no longer applicable.
It's no longer applicable. And if I can just take it one step further, in the 2010 court case on the NHRPL, the 2007 to 2009 RPLs, NHRPLs were set aside by the High Court. 2006 is just a different version of it, but the application to court was to set aside the specific versions that the Department of Health dealt with. You know, so hence the 2006, which was produced still by the Council for Medical Schemes, but then also take into account that that 2006 is purely a version of the SAMA 2004. You know, so if they accept the 2006, well, then by implication, you actually accept the SAMA 2004. Similar book, which was then called the Doctor's Billing Manual. You know, and that same manual, 2004, was updated 2006, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19.
Now, the consequence of these schemes reverting to 2006, and from your perspective, the SAMA 2019 coding book should be used, is that the schemes have the power to approve the payment,
Yes.
and they will not approve the payment if you don't dance according to their tune.
If it's not according to their choice,
Yes.
then yes. And that would be specifically, certain things. So in psychiatry, the coding and the coding descriptors have changed. So the coding descriptors now is a lot more definitive. That suits them, so they will use it. In another case, another code that's been changed is not acceptable when we go back to 2006. And it might be a procedure that's no longer done. So if you look at coding currently, there's a lot of procedures that's not being done at all. And yet the scheme would accept that code because it's in the 2006. So it is an issue, but there is a solution as well. So talk about coding. Sorry, belaboring coding, but that does create, a lot of the issues. Okay, so just to get back...
But it doesn't mean, sorry to interrupt you on the coding
sure.
again, and I know we're going to get to it. It doesn't mean that the use of one code over the other is an indication of misconduct
No.
by the doctor.
No. In fact, I would rather say using the old one as misconduct, but it's the only way you're going to get paid. So just to give an example, we've just recently updated the gynecology coding, and what they've done is they've removed all those old things that doctors just don't do. They just don't do it in clinical practice, but the codes are still there in the old version. Now it's gone, but it's still in a lot of the administrators' billing system. So if you look at the information that schemes send out December and January, and we do get the raw copies of it as well, it still refers to NHRPL. It just means how outdated it is, So it's and the NHRPL doesn't exist even, but that's the reference.
Now, is there any consolidated piece of paper that a doctor will go into, let's say, if you want to claim from Discovery, that you can log onto a document and see what codes they want, whether those codes mirror the 2006 reference pricing or whether they mirror the 2019 summer coding book?
So each of the schemes do publish every year a list of codes and tariffs and so on, but it's all electronically, so it's available. But if you do a procedure, it doesn't necessarily would say, if you do a knee replacement, these are the codes that you should use for Discovery or MedScheme or so on. It should be consistent. What we try and do, if you go onto our own website, we try and publish the codes and tariffs for Discovery, for MedScheme, for BankMed, or not MedScheme, for Bonitas, FedHealth, and so on. So doctors, our members, can go there and say, well, this is the relevant code, that's the tariff that I'm allowed to charge, this is my contract. So there are things available, yes. So it's not darkness, but it's the differing views on coding.
But I mean, would you also agree that, yes, there's the problem of the different views, but there's also the problem of the inconsistency by the schemes when it comes to which codes would be approved?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So there's some uncertainty.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be because it's a definitive matter. There's a code, and we'll go through the coding.
We do hear your point that it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Okay, and then we present ultimately to the client or the investigator the outcome. So when we do a final discussion, we will always have a senior member out of that discipline that sits in, so that there's no doubt about the outcome and the reasoning and the incorrect coding. And then I guess, especially in the surgical disciplines, is to afterwards, especially if a doctor was wrong, is to mentor that doctor and have meetings and discussions. So at each of our conferences, we do run coding workshops, which Mrs. House presents, and Marie present, a coding expert from the discipline, would be to try and teach the doctors how to code. But it's not a nice thing to attend. It's quite boring. Admin people attend to it. And that's not correct. The coding is the doctor's responsible. So if we look at
before you move off the slide, can you just tell us how long this entire process takes to come to the end point of negotiating?
Well, I did one last week, which took 4 days. So that's the easy one, because the scheme's assertions in that one was wrong from the beginning, and I think that's why I call this was a fishing expedition. It was nonsense, and the answers would lead to no conclusion. But some of them, we'd like to do it in 30 days, 30 to 60, but some of them 6 months, and some of them just. And we've got 2 investigations now, and I don't want to mention schemes, but this is a specific GEMS one, where the investigator hasn't come back to us in a year on the issues, It's not so, and we have taken it up with them now and with Metropolitan. But, so some can take more than a year. And for the practitioner, it's a year of misery, because I'm under investigation.
Practitioner on indirect payment in that time?
No, well, in the GEMS, in GEMS would invariably pay all practices direct, but if they have an investigation, they would stop payment. But they only have contracts, DSP type of contracts, and I'm sure you've heard enough about DSPs as well. They only have DSP contracts with about 5 disciplines now, and the GEMS environment, they roll it out about 2 per year, because it's complex, the contracts. And there, of course, I can divert back to the schemes and ourselves and the doctors, is we try, and where there's a formal contract, that it's a contractual term, that the scheme will adhere to the latest available coding principles. And believe me, they battle to sign it. Because that's logic. How can you enter into a contract if you don't know in terms of what you will be paid? And so if I get back to a 2006 NHRPL, it doesn't exist even. Where does a doctor go and find a practitioner 2006? Now the disciplines that's extremely exposed are all the allied groups. The allied groups haven't been able to update their coding. Schemes just ignore it. So they expose, fortunately, from the SAMA and the doctors and specialists and so on side, they're in a lot stronger position than the allied groupings to actually do so. So it's still a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so if we look at the type of analyses, we basically have 2 general types. One is the time-based code practitioner. So when we have a forensic query of a time-based practitioner, we analyze 100% of the claims data, because it's the only way you can actually get to the total minutes that's been spent. And occasionally, that investigation will take longer, and it's a lot of line items to analyze. Then we have the other disciplines, consulting and surgical. We end up with multiple queries on that. And there you tend to focus on the specific issue that's been raised. So if a specific code has been raised or combination, we'll only do that. And it's very infrequently that you'll look at that practice as 100% of the claims data, because it's very specific issues that have been identified by the investigators, but it still takes a fair bit of time, and then trying to combine it, making sure the service date combinations and all of those things are correct. So it's 2 very different ones. And then, of course, you also have issues with, as I mentioned, devices, consumables, lenses, and stuff like that, which comes up. So if I look at specific type of queries, and I don't want to bore you with technical details, these are just type of issues that comes up on a regular basis. So you have codes, rules, and modifiers in the coding book. So a rule is specific. It talks about post-operative care. If you've had an operation, the doctor cannot charge any visits in the next 30 days. That's the rule. So everything is for free. But of course, then occasionally patients have complications, and complications are not covered by this specific rule. So we do have a fair type of queries in this regard. Now, if the complications arise, you will have a separate ICD-10 code, so we get a lot of these. But I'm not going to go through everything that we do, because it's not just to indicate what happens. So a rule L, for instance, would say that deals with if you do your patient first visit at the same day you do operation, you can charge for the visit. the next rule actually then goes on to say if you see the patient today and you do the operation on Monday, you can't charge another patient visit. But things do change. You might have to. So these are the type of issues that comes up. This is a more clinical one, and not this one yet. This, and I'm going to get to it later as well. Code 0129 adds units and tariffs. If you see a patient for more than 60 minutes, now the problem is that you then have to charge it in a combination of 0193 or 0175. Doctors don't record the 0193, they will record either 0190 or 0191 because medical schemes don't pay for 019, 4, and 2 in any case. So that's really an area which I'm going to refer to later, where I think the schemes are erring to a large extent, all of them. There's not one that actually attends to it, and this leads to a lot of queries. So the solution, of course, is that we have to have more detailed patient records on which we record that we've actually spent more time with the patient. This is a typical unbundling one, which is very clinical, so I'm not going to go through it, but these are the type of things that comes up with combination codes, unbundling, and so on. And one needs to apply it, but this is not something that a straight forensic investigator can do. So they need their internal coding experts, and if the scheme itself doesn't have an external coding expert that's really of value, it's always going to lead to a discipline, and there's a whole host of these that happen, but once again it gets back to coding. So they do happen. When we start to look at data, these are all the fields that we have to look at data, and I have asked for a copy of this document to be provided to the panel. It's just one with a lot of columns, which you actually don't even have to look at, but it's an example. So in this specific doctor, it ended up with 119 pages of data that had to be analyzed. Now, the normal practitioner in this position has no means to actually do the work, and many schemes don't do it correct in any case. So it's very difficult if it's a complex review and you have to look at 3 years' data for a practitioner to respond to it or have any means to respond to it. And that's where, with respect, I said, keep the attorneys out of it, because they're not going to do it. They're going to find a legal argument to try and get out of it. But that's with respect to, and I always say, I have very good friends that are attorneys. So, so one shouldn't say that in any case. But nonetheless, so data analytics, whether it's applied by us or by the schemes, quite difficult. I think, especially in our dealings with Discovery Health, we now agree on data analytics, in a forensic review. But it took a few years to get there, but it's good on that, and we share the data and so on, but only relating to the practitioner. I think if we get to the GEMS and the Metropolitan, their analytics at this level will be non-existent with respect to them.
Is this the data that Discovery, that you and Discovery have agreed is reasonable?
Yeah, this is data that we then get from Discovery. They send it to us in Excel, and this keeps Piet or Mr. Kotze busy. And this can take a few days to do. It would be literally, it can be 4,000 or 5,000 line items. So if you send that to a practitioner, and in fact you send it in PDF, what are they going to do with it? Throw it away and hope the problem goes away. So it's quite complex. So the data analytics are really part of the process. In the time-based, we collect it from the practice. It's a lot easier. We try and agree it with the practice data as well. Unfortunately, doctors don't always know, or practitioners, how their practice administration system works, and it's a bit of a battle. So we'll try and get the total data. We'll try and compare it to other schemes and so on as well. So it does work. Well, take a lot of time to clean it up. There's a lot of duplication. So in our initial reviews of scheme data, a lot of duplications. The same claim twice, more than once. But that's working. And Peter, Mr. Kotze, has built models that we can identify duplications and incorrect codes and so on. So it works quite well. So we'll calculate the average hours. Now the next item was contentious when we started. So if you have, for example, a 20 to 40 minute consultation with a specific code, what do you take? So what the schemes originally did, they would take the maximum. So that, of course, will give you a higher answer higher number of hours and so on. So we've now agreed that when you do an analysis like this, you must use the minimum, you must use the mean and the maximum, and come to a compromise, the mean being the compromise. Some of this administrators still battle to work with a mean, and they tend to use the maximum, and that's where, for the good example, our doctor that worked 49 hours. It's a typical example of where the data was wrong, and it was in fact an 8-hour, not a 49-hour day. So we calculate the time, we compare it to time billed for the practice versus what's the available days, what are the days that you typically work. Now, of course, you do get doctors that are workaholics like advocates. You know, they work long hours and every day, and they work on Saturdays. You do get doctors that work 250 days in a year, you know, and they work 12 hours a day. And there are some of those doctors, and you heard from Dr. Koch yesterday. You know, it's she could at any time have 50 patients in a ward, you know, to look after you, long days. Same with the psychiatrist, time per day and analysis, we do it per code, and then we have a look at the group sessions, you know, what's the impact of group sessions. You can't multiply it by 12, you've got to take, divide it by the number of patients in those specific sessions. We also look at the unique patient scene, how many patients did the specific practice see. We look at the combination rules, and then look at the total annual sort of number of hours, minutes, and so on. Now, one of the issues that's raised, and we didn't specifically put it in our report, is this fact that the reviews are 3 years retrospective. That's quite harsh. So there's no current system that has a prospective review. So if you have a rules-based system, which most schemes do, it will pick up certain clinical stuff up front. But if you use a valid code, systems accept it. It's a valid code, it exists. So they'll pay for it, and then when they do a retrospective review 3 years back, you've got a problem. So I think in principle, the 3 years retrospective is wrong. You know, at the most, the current year and 1 year. 3 years is I think, quite harsh. Doctor carries on for 3 years without knowing something is wrong. And as you said, what happens with a new doctor? It's now 3 years down the line. It will basically be quite destructive on the system. So it follows a lot of processes. So you can see, in order to get to an answer at the end of the day, we go through a lot of processes in order to come to a finding that we discuss with the doctor. Other disciplines a lot more difficult. So you have the rules to look at. You have to look at the unbundling of codes, the 014, 5 and 8, and then multiple providers billing for the same service. So that occasionally happens that you have 2 doctors seeing a patient and they both bill for the work done, or you have, as an example, sleep studies being done and the technologist bills for putting up the equipment and the doctor bills for it. So that's got to be unraveled. Wrong nappy codes. The nappy system, in our view, is a bit of a waste of time, but schemes do follow it. The pricing in it is wrong, and you would often be investigated for the pricing and that's used with a code 0201. Currently happening a lot with the hearing aid industry, and we told them it's not going to work. Questionable markup on materials. There is no regulation that say you can't mark up, let's say, a hearing aid or a intraocular lens. There's no regulations on it. And yet you would be reviewed for a perceived too high markup, you know, which is very difficult. So that, especially in the audiology, yes, there are some practitioners that abuse it totally, but there is a norm that you can use, but the nappy pricing is wrong. Then we deal a lot with the modifiers and so on. You know, so on this one, it's, as I said, often some of the reviews are a phishing experience. You know, and you all know what a phishing experience is. You know, the judges don't like that, and you sort of actually don't know what to ask, so you'll ask useless questions. You know, so Audrey's Cox yesterday was, you know, send us all your registration certificates. So we send everything from Cambridge to South Africa. But how is that relevant to a forensic investigation? You know, it just doesn't make sense. Another one that comes through, send us your malpractice insurance cover. It's got nothing to do with the forensic investigation. One we had 2 weeks back is please send us confirmation that you've actually paid your suppliers of stuff. Now, why is that relevant? So if you haven't paid, then what not? It's the supplier's problem. And in this specific instance, it was that the suppliers already confirmed that they were paid. So no, we want to see the payment. Takes it nowhere. So these phishing type of things. Okay, another one on that happens with the gynaes a fair bit is when last was your equipment maintained? Send us the last invoice when maintenance was done. Please. That's different issues. It's not. But nonetheless, that's the phishing, and this I didn't catch anything.
And just tell us on your statistics, and maybe you can note it for later.
Mm-hmm.
How many complaints are related to coding?
80%?
80%.
Yeah, 80, 90.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Majority.
Yeah, it always, it's in fact 90% plus. So because we don't deal with the ones service is not rendered, it doesn't come to us. So for the rest, it would be coding and interpretation. So in fact, you can make it 100%. Our typical problems is the medical scheme administrators make the rules regarding the investigations. I guess it is their right to do so. It's their business. They determine who should be investigated, and it might come out of various ways, but they have to respond to that. They carry out the investigations themselves. It's not that it's ever contracted to an expert in a specific field. They employ their own methodology. So, I think what one should try and do is there should be a standard way of doing the work. A standard flow of processes, the way you deal with the analytics, the timing that you do with it. Everybody mustn't do their own thing. It makes our lives a misery, and practitioners as well. The initial letter to the practitioner can be very intimidating with unreasonable demands, and that's still in place. Doctor, here's a list of things that we want. Please send it to us within 7 days, or please send it to us within 14 days. That's unreasonable. When that ends up with us, we will contact the scheme, and we will have adequate time to resolve it. But that initial letter, I think, should be a bit more accommodating.
And are you then able to get that data from the practitioner?
Yeah, the letter.
No, the information that the letter is requesting.
Yeah, we've got to get it from the practitioner, but occasionally it would be, let's say, we want, and that's another debate, I guess, we want 60 patient files.
Yes.
For a doctor to extract that 60 patient files is time consuming, they're busy. They also have to go through the files to see what's in the contents. Invariably, some of those clinical data would be in the hospital files. And the hospitals aren't always that keen, so, that is not appropriate. But our personal investigations, once we interact with either MedScheme or Discovery, we will have enough time to do the work.
And confidential information of the patient?
That's not one that I can answer you. But there's a lot of resistance to it, and in our recommendations, it's really something that the HPCSA and CMS must come up with definitive guidelines or recommendations on that. In a lot of instances, it's not that critical, but I think when you deal, let's say, with mental health, that's very confidential what's in there. So and that can't be shared. Now, I guess if it went to a doctor, it's fine, but it doesn't go to a doctor. If it goes to, and even invariably, some of it, if you want a neurosurgeon's file, it should go to a neurosurgeon. But the confidentiality is an issue. I don't have the answer on that.
And it's the forensic investigator that then assesses what you provide.
I would assume so. Whether they ask their own medical staff to look at it, possibly. In our work in the MedScheme environment, we always have a doctor that works with us on everything.
Do you bring in the doctor, or is it the scheme?
No, it's the scheme's doctor. But just remember, in all of our cases, we'll bring in one of our doctors as well. And in this case, the MedScheme doctor would sit with our doctor, and they will go through it and come to an agreement. That works a lot quicker. You get rid of the useless stuff very quickly. Okay, so the clinical data, that's difficult. And I guess once the new POPE Act's in place, even more difficult. Occasionally, some of those initial letters
isn't there
already.
another problem with this
Sure.
access to clinical data? Because you see, some schemes will suspend or put on direct payment because of non-cooperation. And one of the grounds of non-cooperation is failure to submit
Yes.
clinical information. And on the one hand, the practitioner says, I can't give it to you because I'm bound by doctor-patient privilege.
I agree with you.
And how, I mean, you say...
That's problematic, but we seldom get into those. You know, what we would have is a doctor would collect the files and we would jointly go to the scheme, request a medical advisor and go through it. But I don't think we've had cases where looking at the clinical notes has actually resulted in much. You know, it's because if it's a time-based, yes, you can have a look at, I saw the doctor, the patient 10 minutes, 30 minutes or so on. But if it's let's say it's surgery, who's going to unravel that? No one. The only thing that you can see out of the file is that the doctor saw the patient. But there's other ways to verify that. You can look at diary, you can look at billings, you can look at a whole host of stuff. But it's contentious and one needs definitive answers on what should happen and what should the process be. Should there be something more independent? Okay, then the other problem which you've already...
I'm sorry to interject. Perhaps if I can assist in regard to the disclosure of clinical information by practitioners to medical schemes. Medical schemes quite often rely on a blanket consent contained in their membership contract with the medical scheme member, and state that that is the reason that they're entitled and have consent, proper consent to view the records. The HPCSA has actually also recently documented and make it available to you if required.
When did they say that?
It was earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. Earlier this year or late last year. I speak under correction. No?
I mean, this is odd because we've had individual practitioners here who've told us that this presents a dilemma for them. They told us this last month. And we had the HPCSA here to give evidence, and no one spoke about this blanket consent. Everybody has proceeded until now on the assumption that supplying this information is a violation of the National Health Act. Anyway, whenever you find it, if you could send it to the Secretariat. Yeah.
I will do so, sir.
Okay, and then of course the last one there is, you know, especially in the early days and even occasionally now, payment has been suspended without due process being followed. You know, so which is of course quite unfair on a practitioner. Okay, then schemes can take a protracted period to progress with investigations. I've already alluded to the GEMS one, which is now already a year later. Nothing has happened.
Mr. Venter, can I just interrupt you there? It seems the appropriate moment to do so. I just want to take you to your submission on page 4, paragraph 5. I mean, it's part of your recommendations, and it goes to this question of what the medical scheme or administrator, what information should the medical scheme or administrator be providing to the provider in order to be able to properly answer any allegations that are made against the provider in relation to fraud, waste, and abuse. And in your submission, you suggest 3 things. And I'm just going to read it out because
Sure.
I don't expect you to turn to it immediately. So you say, to ensure that all parties clearly understand the investigation and allegations, it will be requested that the scheme administrator forensic entity provide us with a detailed account of the investigation, the codes investigated, and the alleged irregularities. And then you say sufficient details in writing relating to practice profiles and possible anomalies. And the third is disclosure of all evidence, including data, patient testimonials obtained in writing, and not merely by hearsay, as well as exact details of the issues that the scheme has with the healthcare provider. So I want to just get you to confirm that that's what you believe should be provided, and explain, because I'll explain some of the detail, because we are grappling with well, what is the provider entitled to know in order to be able to meaningfully answer any allegations? And we had some debate about this in the morning, and you've suggested so far that being provided with the data is one of the components, but I want to understand more about this.
Yes, I definitely do think so. And if you take, and I just looked at the letter earlier today again, where it sort of says that we have done the calculation and you owe us 600,000. That's it, based on. But there's no data. So you need, and if you want 600,000 from a practitioner, I want each and every line item that comprises that 600,000, each of the errors that were made, the quantification thereof, because on the practices side, ultimately you have to allocate it against a patient's account. So if there's just a blanket deduction, how do you ever get your accounting system in line? You can't. The further one that we haven't even mentioned here, how do you handle your VAT? It has a VAT implication. How do you handle your tax? If the receiver queries suddenly your profile differs, which hopefully they're going to do again, is how do you substantiate that? Okay, tell us what exactly makes it up. So I don't think you can reclaim anything without a detailed account per line item of everything that you want. All the data, all the assumptions. So I'll give you for example of this morning's one we read is we've calculated that on average your practice works 12 hours a day. That's too much. We're only going to allow 4 hours per day across our schemes. How do you get to that thumbsuck? You can't do that. So definitely any recovery quantification has to be per line item. Can't do it without that. And it's wrong. All the other one is we've investigated a sample, let's say of 16 that we found 10 errors. Therefore, we extend or extrapolate that over your total claims base, and we get to recover 1 million. It's also wrong. You can't use a sample. If you want to quantify an error, you have to do each and every item, unfortunately. It's the only fair way. You can't make a generalization, no.
I suppose from the perspective of the schemes, they firstly are processing large volumes. I think someone spoke about 35,000 claims submitted each year. Each day, rather. And they have to use an averaging model in order to, because it's just impractical. And then that's the one argument put forward. And the other argument is it's actually in the interest of the members that we must have an expedited system of recoveries.
Yes, you must. Sorry.
And so that's why they pick up a sample, they average, and they give you a percentage.
Yeah, well, my answer to that, it's the wrong way to do it. Second one is you process large volumes of transactions per day. That's what you get paid for to do. So don't complain about it if that's what your job is to do. And then to extrapolate and recover is not the appropriate way to do it. And we, in the work that we now do, we don't follow that approach. It's got to be per line item. We want to come to the right answer. And you can just think, you go to court and you put someone in jail because you've now averaged out, You didn't commit one murder, it's likely it might have been 20 or 30, or speeding fines, you can't average. If you want to recover and find someone guilty about a transgression, you have to be factual. Can't be different. Okay?
Sorry, can I just ask Mr. Botha a question?
Sure.
On the guideline, the change to the guideline that you referred to, does that not apply in the context of managed healthcare, that HPCSA guideline?
It does, but if my recollection serves correctly, it was also used with regards to forensic investigations. I'm trying to source the information now. It was done under the guise of Regulation 15J, or guise, I think is an unfair word, but
in Regulation 15 deals with managed healthcare, so it wouldn't cover this a private practice of a sole practitioner, or even a group practice that's not a managed care organization. In that situation, it would not be permissible then for the doctor to provide the clinical information. Is that correct understanding?
I'm sorry, could you just rephrase that? I'm not sure
So
I'm following.
if the guideline that you're referring to, the recent one, is based on Regulation 15J, and Regulation 15J talks about managed care organizations,
Yes.
it would mean that it's only those practitioners that work in that context that would be required to provide the patient information to the funder.
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, if I can take you to your submission, at page 5, at paragraph 32, under written consent regarding clinical notes. This is what you say here, so I just want to understand that we get you right. Regulation 15J2C states that it is subject to the provisions of other legislation. Therefore, it is subject to Section 14 of the National Health Act. That's what I was trying to put to you there. This means that notwithstanding the wording of the regulation, a practitioner must seek his or her patient's consent before disclosing that patient's information to a medical aid scheme. Our submission is that the recent pronouncements by the HPCSA in this regard is mistaken, and that the plain and unambiguous wording of the regulation means that proper written consent must be obtained from the patient prior to disclosure of the information for purposes of forensic investigations. So it seems that it's certainly in the written submission, you disagree with the pronouncement. What you are proposing instead is that each time a scheme wants information for forensic purposes, it should ask for specific consent. It can't rely on prior consent that was given to the scheme generally.
Yes, that is correct. It's for
So
that
then-
particular purpose.
So then why are we concerned with what the HPCSA said when you say that they are mistaken anyway? Anyway, let's continue, Mr. Kenta.
Okay, I think we've covered most of the items on this because you've asked the questions already about further concerns on the investigation process. We spoke about data sharing and data analysis yesterday, and I think that remains a stumbling block. You know, if you don't have, let's say, in a specific discipline, full data analysis, it's very difficult to indicate whether you are outside the norm or you don't compare to your peers. You know, so we do get the data on the practitioner that's being investigated, but that's sort of stuck in the middle a bit. We don't know where it fits in the total spectrum. Now, that's the one thing, I guess, that in general in the industry, in the healthcare industry, data is not made available in any meaningful, really, and then especially the GEMS people don't share any level of data. So at least what we do get out of it, Discovery Health Environment, we get aggregate claims data that we use every year, so we do see a lot of trends in that, how many practitioners claim certain codes, what the total values are. So that's made available a year in arrears, so we can check against that. But in other environments, we just don't get any data, so data will remain a sticky point. Coding, as you've already heard, the coding is a contentious issue. It leads to, let's say, 100% of our forensic reviews. I'm going to tell you a bit about the history of coding, just so that you understand it. And I will try and be brief, if that's possible from an accountant. So prior to 2004, I think it was the happy world, and everybody spoke to each other. BHF and the SAMA was able to meet with each other and discuss things. So the medical profession determined the codes and descriptors, but they continue to do so. The HPCSA calculated an ethical tariff. That was discontinued in 2008. Now that on its own does create a dilemma, because it was always used as the benchmark for overcharging. There is no benchmark for overcharging at this stage. So if you charge 6 times more, so what? You know, there is no benchmark, it doesn't happen. Prior to 2004, there was the annual negotiations between BHF and SAMA on coding structures and tariffs. You know, so it was a happy world. And then in 2004, the Competition Commission intervened, stating that these processes are collusive. They fined Hazel, Sama and BHF, and consent orders were signed that it won't happen again. The result, of course, is no benchmarks, no codes at that stage, no tariffs, so it did leave a bit of a void. The NHRPL was created by the CMS for 2 years, and that actually worked well because the CMS at that stage did sit down with the disciplines and discuss it, and we took certain disciplines and looked at them specifically in those years. That's when psychiatry worked quite well. That's why psychiatry have tier-based consultations. Department of Health assumed the responsibility to 2006 and 9, and that led to the court case in 2010. The applicants in that case was SAPAF, HAZA, ER24, and Netcare 911. And it was heard in Pretoria, and it was set aside. However, SAMA continues with the publishing of the Medical Doctors Coding Manual, as I said earlier. HPCSA tried a process in 2012 and 2013 to determine ethical tariffs and publish. It was a dismal failure. It actually never got off the ground even. We attended those meetings, but in fact, the chairman of that committee told us, so let's meet next Saturday and we'll sort out the coding and tariffs. That was a bit optimistic, it's not going to happen. SAMA kept on publishing, as I've said. SAMA and SAPAF have a memorandum of understanding with each other on the way forward on coding, because it doesn't help you to have two organizations going in different ways if you don't cooperate on the coding and you don't agree on the contents of this manual. Processes are in place with Discovery for updates, so that's working quite well. We work quite well with the coding expert, and Mrs. Gou spends a lot of time with them when we do changes so that there's consensus. So if schemes say they don't follow it, it's not the truth. There's lots of consensus on lots of changes, and it's happening. Med schemes come to the party now as well, and we're sitting with their coding expert on a regular basis to update their systems. I've shown you the specific specialist guidelines, these publications. This is really worthwhile, and this is even better than the Big Bible because it's discipline specific. It's very difficult to unravel this big book and find your stuff, so this is applicable to the discipline and extremely easy to update, and there's no cost really involved in it, so that works quite well. What we did propose at SAPAF is the establishment of an independent coding authority. We've discussed that with Department of Health, but it hasn't gone anywhere. We discussed it with the HPCSA. It hasn't gone anywhere. It is in the HMI report, of course, but it's not the HMI that thought about it. It comes from our submission, and at least it looks that they read it, which is quite pleasing. And it was in their final report as well. And they talk about the independent regulator. Unfortunately, I think Dr. Pillay indicated to us is just going to file that recommendation. It's going to be too difficult to do it. So we'll see where that goes. So we've already established such an entity. It's been registered with CIPC, SA Classification of Healthcare Interventions, which is a multi-stakeholder organization and a non-profit company that one can work from. So the main coding systems, ICD, CPT, and the Medical Doctors Coding Manual. There is nothing outside that. And the CPT, SAMA holds the license. It's updated annually, a year in arrear with the US system, so that's in place. Then I thought this would be interesting for you because it indicates that the coding world's not that difficult, to resolve. So I've looked at the total claims base of data that we've received. So 25 codes comprise 50% of all claims. So I'm talking about the doctor environment, not pathology, radiology, the specialists, the surgeons, the GPs. So sort out that 25. How difficult is that? 100 is 74%, 200 is 85%, 300 is 90%, 463, 95%. So if you sort out 463 codes and the combinations thereof, you cover 95% of the claims. So do that well. And be in agreement between the funders, the doctors, investigators about those issues. And then you can see the difference on that is, let's say 1,300 codes, only makes up 5%, just aggregating it. And just of interest, these are the top 12 codes that you can focus on. This is published every year by the Council for Medical Schemes. So basic consult at the top, your hospital visits, and then your various surgical procedures. And if you then split that into procedures, you will see And that's why there's such a lot of emphasis on the psychiatrist, with a lot of pressure from the medical schemes. It's the highest charged procedure code, psychotherapy, so it's even higher than your cesareans or cataracts. So once again, if you have problems, these are the top 12 codes that drives the medical industry to a large extent. Focus on these items. It's not that difficult. So what we've done in the process is, okay, so let's identify the top 300 codes per discipline, making up, and fix it. You know, so we've already fixed about a third of those and come to an agreement with the scheme as to what we've done. So the gynecology, 30 codes that's got to be fixed, it's been done. Discovery's agreed to it, SAMA's agreed to it, and we're busy with MedScheme on that. And so you can work through each of the disciplines and fix what's broken or fix what's unclear in your mind. This is to indicate another area where forensics do come up. So I've taken the global obstetric fee, the vaginal delivery. The correct relative value units that should be used in the system is 462. With the exception of PolMed, all the other schemes divert to 282, which, coming back to your earlier, is 2006. Now, what's happened in between? Insurance cost has rocketed for a gynecologist to R1,100,000. You've got to recover it. You recover it out of your obstetric fee, and this number was come up by Inside Actuary, so we're happy with the number. This is where we base a time-based issue here, let's say psychotherapy. So the code reads 21,240. Schemes, now where do you fit it in? You know, do you fit it in at 21 or 30 or so on? So it leads to confusion, so that one we're busy rewriting. This is a specific discovery group issue. So the accepted units for 0109 is 15 units. Discovery across the schemes pay 10. So the doctors are, of course, not happy. And that leads you to you doing other things. You know, and perhaps we should go and recover this. You know, also send a letter and say, in 7 days, please pay. That's being a bit facetious, but nonetheless. Okay, then the consultation. Now, I want you to understand that there is no medical scheme in South Africa that pays medical doctors for the full time that they spend on patients. So if you spend an hour with a patient, except psychiatry, because we fixed that in 2004. If you spend an hour with a pediatrician, you will be paid 26 minutes. So if you have a pediatric neurologist, that there's a dozen in the country, you're not going to be paid, and that's all that you do. So you're not getting paid for it, you get paid at 50%. Then they use a variety of time. So I've put the correct time there on, that's how it's published, and it's been like that for many years. The schemes pay, let's say, for a 15-minute consult across the various disciplines. They'll pay either 15 minutes, 17 minutes, 18 minutes, or 26. So the 15 is GPs, the 17 is ENTs, urologists, and so on. The 18 is the gynae, the 26 is a neurosurgeon, pediatricians, and so on. But then they pay that exact same combination for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and 60 minutes. And they don't budge on it. So you as an advocate, if you charge an hour, and I'm always only going to pay you for half an hour. You're not going to be happy. You know, the doctors aren't happy. The attorneys, of course, charge per minute. You know, that's even worse. But nonetheless, that is a major area of contention. And as you've seen on a previous slide, this makes up about 25% of the total healthcare claims on which the doctors are not being compensated. So that will remain an issue. So the way forward, I think we've got to get to some consensus. Going to be a rough road, but we need consensus. So our recommendations, all parties to agree to a fair and transparent process that's uniform across the industry. We don't want one process at the one administrator, another one at another one. You do it in different ways. That should include, you know, the withhold, the recovery, and so on. And there should be a standard terms of reference, which we drew up many years back, but no one wanted to agree to it. Continue to pay the practitioner whilst the investigation is in process. The MDCM, the doctor's coding manual, should be the reference for all coding disputes. Because if you have a dispute and you don't have a reference point, what do you use? You know, you should have a book, like the Companies Act. If you have a dispute, you go to the Companies Act, you know, dispute it. Coding disputes not resolved should be referred to external experts, or really do so. You know, that's independent and can be made up of the various disciplines. We've spoken just about this now, CMS, HPCSA, to clarify access to patient records, you know, and we'll get the documents to you. Legal advice whether the data can be shared across disciplines. So can Discovery and MedScheme share data on a doctor or not? You know, I don't know what the legal position on that would be, but it does happen. You know, I don't think it's fair, but nonetheless. Our advice to the practitioners, never ever tackle this without a representative, you know, but that's the doctor's or practitioner's choice. If you do want to do it alone, you're in the deep end. Disputes not resolved. I think in our recommendation we might have said a total independent directorate. I think that's not going to work, you know, but for disputes you need an ombudsman. I don't think we can ever have a central body doing all the investigations. That's a scheme's prerogative to do it. It's their claim, it's their money, it's their patients. So, but if you don't resolve a dispute, there must be some mediation mechanism to try and resolve it. Repeat offenders, and we do have repeat offenders, should be referred to the HPCSA for sanctioning. You know, that will have an effect. Unfortunately, and I am being critical, is the HPCSA process takes years. You know, I'm still battling with 10-year-old disputes. You know, it's not easily done, and that's why the schemes won't refer to the HPCSA, because nothing should happen. And then the fraudsters should be dealt with within the law. Okay, and then the sharing of the data we've already spoken about, and the only way to resolve it is to actually work together. You know, we mustn't work in our own little silos. Schemes, the doctors, the investigators should work together and try and resolve the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Your colleagues are still here. I wonder if they want to add anything, or you decide if you think there's something they should add.
I don't think so. We've dealt with all the issues. It was purely if you're going to ask me a trick question, and I claim innocence, then I'll refer it to the panel.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much then to you, Mr. Fenter, and to your team for your presentation. We will be sending you further questions. If you could, if you don't mind, sending them to our secretariat.
Yeah, of course we'll do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will. All right, we will adjourn then for, say, 10 minutes. So we should resume at 10 minutes past 3.